Hello, Garland Nixon here, and it appears to me that Europe is being devastated by a plague, by the fourth great plague, and I'm going to argue that this is a plague of ideology. Let's talk. Hey, Garland here. Great to hang out with my online friends for another Sunday night talk. All right. I guess people would think of this as an interesting title for a YouTube show. Referring back to the plagues that have struck Europe. Numerous plagues have struck Europe. Various versions of the Black Plague. Here and there have cropped up, and of course, we know about the infamous Black Plague, and of course about smallpox, things of that nature. There was another one, I believe it was 1855, that lasted quite a while. But at any rate, my point being, what is a plague? Why am I using that as a reference point today? Of course, a plague, let's look up the definition. Why don't we do this? Why don't we start up? And I think it's important. As you know, any word can have more than one definition. Any word can have numerous definitions, right? So when we talk about the definition of a word, we pick one particular: plague. A widespread affliction or calamity seen as divine retribution. Of course, there's others, and there's very specific. The Yersinia pestis, that's the Black Death. But we're going with a widespread affliction or calamity seen as divine retribution, because I would imagine. Let me tell you something. By the time next winter ends, people are going to be making a lot of biblical references in Europe. There's going to be a lot of biblical references of the final days, of you name it. Why? Because there are a lot of parts of the world that unfortunately have been forced to become accustomed to very difficult periods of time, of not enough food, of not being able to really afford to live. You've got gigantic shanty towns. Look at some Lagos, Nigeria, things like that, right? So there are no, look at India, the great Mumbai slums and some of the gigantic slums. The Mumbai slums, 5 million people, only one of many slums where millions and millions of people live in India. So there are a lot of countries, unfortunately, that are accustomed to some very, very difficult periods. Rockfin, wow, it looks like they're saying they're having trouble streaming to Rockfin today. Well, we'll do the best that we can. Interesting. Yeah, they're having some trouble, so this might not work on Rockfin. Well, that kind of sucks. But at any rate, I will. I'll keep going. And sadly, maybe this particular Rockfin video won't be around. See, I've got this. I support Caleb Maupin hat. I don't care who likes that or who doesn't. Doesn't matter to me. But I went and ordered the hat just so I could stick it back there and let people know that I view Caleb as a person who was attacked, in my opinion, by deep state forces. He was threatened before he did his event. So we won't get into Caleb, but my support for Caleb is pretty clear. And I got a hat, and I will support anyone. I happen to like Caleb, and I think he's a good guy, but I would support anyone, even somebody who I had dramatic ideological differences with, if I felt that person was being targeted by by government officials. So understand that. At any rate, so what we're looking at now, when you look at the history of plagues, what you look at is a lot of people dying. That's kind of, we can talk about people seeing it as divine retribution, or what kind of bacteria or whatever causes it. But ultimately, what people think of when they think of a plague is a lot of people die of devastating deaths. Well, during the Black Plague, up to half of the people in Europe died. And then, when you think of pandemic, so when a lot of people looked at coronavirus and had that discussion with the number of deaths, the percentage of people that died as opposed to the percentage of people that got it, things of that nature, that's a discussion that people are going to have when you talk about a pandemic, a plague, et cetera, right? So I felt it was appropriate, because let's be honest about this. Let's just for a second, let's go worst case scenario, right? Let's just do worst case scenario just for a minute. Worst case scenario being, looks like I'm on Rockfin. Looks like I'm rolling on Rockfin again. Had a little bit of a difficult time, but it looks like I'm there. Um, okay, so where were we? So when you look at the direction that Europe is going now, if worst case scenario hits and they don't have in significant areas of Europe, gigantic, large portions of Europe, that you're looking at one of two things. Worst case scenario, they can't get the energy they need, and you have electric turned off. You have, which means water turned off, which means no electric, no heat, no power for millions and millions of people in Europe in the most freezing, devastating time of winter. Certainly, that's very, very bad news. You're going to get a lot of deaths from that. Now, let's go to the next scenario that's not as bad, that's still terrible, that's still unbearable. And that is the energy is there, but the cost is so high that people can't afford it. And so now everybody's priced themselves out of the energy market. Now you've got a country where, let's just use a number, 30% of the people in the country cannot afford to heat their homes, cannot afford gas, cannot afford electricity. 30% of the people in your country. You can't have a country where 30% of the people are shut down, where 30% of the people don't have power, gas, etc. Because first of all, how are those people going to survive? How are they going to go to work? And add this, what about the buildings that they're in? 30% of the people. That means you're going to have whole entire neighborhoods, entire working poor and poor neighborhoods where every house, every building, everything, nobody can afford their gas, nobody can afford their electric. So entire swaths of cities and swaths of countries that are just going to be dark with no gas and electricity. And you have to excuse me, got a little thirsty tonight. And if that's the case in the dead of winter, what are you going to get? You're now going to get issues with cleanliness and sewage. If people can't flush their toilets, people can't wash their clothes, people don't have hot water, right? Now you're talking about true disease and pestilence. I mean, common diseases, common illnesses that happen in the poorer countries because they don't have proper sewage. You're now talking about London and Berlin not having proper sewage, not because the country doesn't have the capability for the sewage. It does, but because the people cannot afford it. So it doesn't matter what your reason is. If your reason is because somebody blew up all your sewage plants, because you have no electricity and you can't run your sewage plants, or because people can't afford to pay to run your sewage plants and they can't afford to pay for these things, either way, you don't have them. Any of those scenarios, people, it doesn't work, doesn't have the energy, it's been blown up, people can't afford it. The end result is people don't have gas, people don't have electricity. Worst case scenario, it isn't even there. Next worst case scenario, it's there, but people can't afford it. Either way, you get the same outcome, which is what? It is social unrest. And you know what that's going to mean? That's going to mean a pushback. Do you really think the German government, that a Liz Truss government, is going to sit back and say, let's listen to the people? Oh my gosh, the people are upset because they're starving and they have no food, because they have no heat and they have no power and they can't cook their food, and the grocery stores are getting emptier by the day. Oh my gosh, things are falling apart. The people are upset. What shall we do? Do you think Liz Truss has the ability to do that? No, you know what Liz Truss is going to be saying? Hey, we need a new NATO to confront China. Oh, we need to send more weapons to Ukraine. See, the reason that Liz Truss and the Olaf Scholz of the world continue to rise is because the way you rise is to show that you'll go along with whatever the system wants. So if you prove to the system you'll do whatever they want, no matter how detrimental it is to the commoners, then you can rise. So she can rise because they already know she can become prime minister, because they already know before she becomes prime minister, now, no matter how hard it gets on the people, she'll do what she can to use violent repression against the people, but she'll never reverse course unless Washington tells her to reverse course. And sadly for the British, they've got the guard dog, right? They've become the guard dog. And the guard dog is more inclined to protect his master than he is himself. The guard dog will die, will give his life fighting to save his master. The guard dog is going to stay between you and his master. And if you come towards his master, he's going to fight to the death. And I mean to the death. He doesn't care, because his job, he's been trained instinctually. He's been trained in every way, shape, and form to guard his master. And he will fight you to the death. That's all that England is now. The master is here in Washington, D.C., and Europe has been trained to fight for the master, and they're willing to give up everything. They're willing to give up their economy. They're willing to give up their troops. They don't care. If Washington calls the leader of the UK, their so-called special relationship, and says, okay, guys, we want you to take all of the bodies of your citizens and heave them into the sea, and it's no problem. They'll heave them all into the sea and they'll all be dead. What difference does it make? They're just going to do what they're told to do. That's what a guard dog does. And so the plague now, that means, here's what that means. All these things that I'm saying, worst case scenario, second worst case scenario, right? All adds up to the same thing. And that is the thing, the impetus for the pain and likely death, because going into Europe, going into the winter without having, enough energy and things like that, we hit any of those worst or kind of worst case scenarios, a lot of people are going to die of malnutrition, of exposure to the elements. A lot of people are going to freeze to death. They're going to die of disease related to a lack of adequate sewage and things related to hygiene. So the bottom line is what the Western leaders are doing right now. After telling us for the last 3 years, everybody has to do what they're told because they're looking out for our well-being. For the last 3 years, they've told us we've got to do all this because we've got to protect our fellow people from what? From getting sick and dying. That's what we've been told. So for the last 2 years, 2.5 years, what we've been told is that the government's main objective was to keep us healthy, was to look out for our health. All the things it was telling us to do. So a lot of things that people didn't want to do. Some of the things that people wanted to do, the government wouldn't let them do. But the government's argument all along was, I am acting in your best interest for your health and well-being. That's been their argument. You got to do what you're saying for the health and well-being of all, right? Now the governments, those same governments in Europe, are now going into the winter, knowing that there's a likelihood that they will not have enough energy to maintain a civil society throughout the winter. Which means if they were any kind of leaders of consequence, they would say, get together and say, what are we going to do? Well, if we don't act in a certain way, if we don't address the energy issue, then a lot of our people will die. They know that. What you think? A lot of people in Germany won't die. What's going to happen if Germany runs out of gas? What's going to happen if entire cities? What's going to happen if power stations shut down? If they got to do brownouts in the middle of the winter? They're shutting down, and then they have an emergency and Nord Stream 1 shuts down. And the Russians say to them, well, there's only one way to get gas, through Nord Stream 2. If you want it, you can have it. If you don't. What is Germany going to say? We ain't opening Nord Stream 2 up, where our people are just going to have to freeze to death. This is a consequence of just a terrible ideology, the ideology that is practiced by the Western states, which is it presents itself as neoliberalism, neoconservatism, etc. It presents itself as the woke ideology. That's the predominant ideology right now, and that's the ideology that says we have to take action that we believe is going to crush Russia's economy. And then when it doesn't, we have to say, we've got to keep doing it because it will within a month or two, within 6 months, within a year. We have to ignore the collateral damage because the collateral damage is just working people. The collateral damage is just regular people. That's why they can ignore the collateral damage, because it's just nobodies. It's just little people. So their perspective is, well, if they get too jumpy, they get too froggy, we'll bring in the military and mow them down. So I think that I think what we're looking at is a situation where there could be a mass deaths. There's the potential for mass deaths in Europe from the things I just brought up, right? That doesn't involve the Russians attacking anybody. That doesn't involve the Chinese attacking anyone. That doesn't involve COVID coming back around as some vicious new strain that kills everybody on contact. That doesn't involve monkeypox. You know what I mean? All the things that we're told, nuclear annihilation, all the things that we're told to be afraid of. And in the end, it looks like if you're in Europe, what you really need to be concerned about is the foreign policy of your country being seized by the United States taking power of attorney for your foreign policy. And then, and if they have your foreign policy, then they have your domestic policy. Because let's face it, if you're Europe, I want you to think about this for 1 second with Europe. one of the things that we're told is, and I'm going to debunk this argument that there's a problem with the Europeans getting their energy from Russia because then Russia can control them, right? Okay. If the Europeans get their energy from Russia, that gives Russia or this is the argument, an inordinate amount of power over their foreign policy, right? So you can't get it from you can't get energy from Russia because it gives Russia too much power over your foreign policy, right? Well, let me ask you this. So let's just say you decide now the EU says we're not going to do that because they'll have power over our foreign policy. We're going to get it from Qatar. So they make a deal with Qatar. Qatar's providing all of that. That's not a reality. They're not doing, but you start doing that. So you make this deal with Qatar. Qatar now provides 100% of your gas at a reasonable price, which they can't provide it at the same price because it's not uh, uh, um, in a pipeline. It has to be transported, and that's a lot more expensive. But here's the bottom line. So, okay, now Qatar buys 100% of your gas. Let me ask you this. You want to make a move in the Middle East, and Qatar don't want you to make that move. Do they have any influence? Doesn't Qatar have now significant influence over your foreign policy because you're buying like 100% of your gas from them? What if you're getting it from somewhere else, Algeria? See, the bottom line is this. You have to get goods and services from other countries, whether it's gas, whether you're building planes and you got to get titanium and aluminum, whatever it is that you're building, there are other countries. You're building cars, you got to get certain things, right? So the bottom line is you've got to get certain goods from other countries. And if is your most significant good, with some countries they can pump their own energy, so it's not. There's other things that is their most important good. So whatever the case may be, let's say you get energy from anybody, the United States, Russia, Saudi Arabia, whoever, right? Here's the reality. Here's the problem with the argument that Russia will control Europe if Europe gets cheap energy from Russia. Any country that sells you energy has a certain amount of sway. The bottom line is any country that's selling you energy, particularly if it's a large amount. If they sell you 4% of their energy, no. But let's say you got one country and you get 60% of your energy, 40% of your energy from that country. That country has some horsepower. They can pressure you because they can stop selling you that. But that's not only relative to Russia. So when the U.S. says, "Well, Europe, you shouldn't be buying cheap energy from Russia because then Russia has some authority over your foreign policy," it's not that there's no credibility to that argument. It's that any country you're buying energy from is going to have a certain amount of sway over your foreign policy. So you really haven't said anything when you mention that, other than the only thing you've really said is when you buy energy from a country or something very important, that country then has some level of power over you. If you desperately need that commodity, they can cut you off. So all you've said is this is how geopolitics works in the real world. Like, who didn't know that? That's geopolitics in the real world. Countries buy stuff from other countries. Countries need stuff from other countries. Countries bargain, and they bargain with geopolitical power, not just with whatever the commodity is. So it's no big deal. What Europe should have done was simply got the best deal they could for gas, for energy, and continued forward. But no, the U.S. doesn't want that to happen, so they're going to pay the price. Okay. So what we're looking at is why. Why is it that Europe is taking an action that is going to cause so much pain on their population, so much economic pain? And in all likelihood, I would imagine there will be excess deaths. Particularly how many, I have no idea. Could it be just a few? From people freezing to death? It's possible. If you have a worst case scenario, and let's say there's a big fight and a big blow up with Russia, and Russia completely turns off the taps, could you have millions or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people freezing to death? I think it's possible. I don't know. I'm not an expert, but it certainly seems that Europe has almost 800 million people, and you turn out of gas or turn off, the power on 10% of them, 84 million, but it'd likely be a lot less than that. So that would be the equivalent of a plague. But this plague, that'd be killing of huge percentages of people. When you look at the actual death rate over the course of the last couple of years of COVID, the actual numbers of death rate, if you include the Omicron wave, it's going to be pretty low. It's going to be all the numbers are far less than 1%. of people who contracted it and died of it. So the bottom line is that here we're looking at an instance where um, we could be discussing the percentage of people who died from an ideological decision, right? We're mad at Russia, or we're trying to take Russia out. When they say they're mad at Russia, let's get down to what it really means. The U.S. had this plan. In the same way that the U.S. has a plan to use Taiwan to destabilize China, the U.S.'s plan was to use Ukraine to destabilize Russia and hope for regime change. And even though it's not working, part of that plan involves sacrificing Europe if necessary, sacrificing Europe's economy if necessary. And right now, it looks like they have deemed it necessary, and Europe's economy will be sacrificed. Now, I think I could argue the fall. You know how you always see the rise and fall of an empire? Well, I could say we could talk about the fall and rise of Europe, because Europe's about to fall. And the question is, what's going to rise up out of it? I don't think the people of Europe are just going to sit around and, they may sit and watch as their country is turned into ashes. But once their countries are turned into ashes, I think there's going to be hell to pay. And I've wondered for a while whether the time will come within the next few years where there will be discussion of criminal responsibility held to the Liz Trusses and the Sholofs and the Macrons of this world, particularly in Northern Europe where it's going to get cold. But look at what you're looking at economically in the UK, that there could be such devastating poverty and the resulting deaths of, God knows what crime, you name it, that at some point people could look at the leaders that did this and say they need to be held criminally accountable. That any, as they say in courts, a reasonable and prudent man, as that's what it actually says in, a lot of the old laws, a reasonable and prudent man, but a reasonable and prudent person, whatever you want to call it, could have easily seen what was coming. And we're sitting here talking about what's coming. So the people in charge don't have any idea. It doesn't make sense, does it? So I wonder if at some point in years to come, the time will come where the people of Europe in various countries will be asking about how they can hold the people accountable who've done this to them, who've, deindustrialized their continent, who've impoverished their continent, and who has, turned everything inside out for their lives. I mean, bottom line, the UK, the pubs are closing. They're going to have nothing, man. The UK is going to have nothing. It's going to be a sad. Europe's just going to be a backwater third world place. It's and I'd say within what? How close is winter? That's all you got to ask yourself. How close is winter? When is it going to happen? How close is winter? That's the answer. When's that going to happen? How close is winter? Oh, it's 3 months out. There, you just answered it. How close is winter? 2 months out. You just answered your question. When's everything go to hell? How close is winter? It's a month and a half out. You just answered your question. That's the way it is, because as winter hits, and we're talking about Northern Europe. It's starting to get cool now. September, October is going to be, Northern Europe gets cold, very, very cold. So how are people in Europe going to deal with no heat whatsoever, and in some instances no electricity? I don't know. But I think it will be the equivalent of plagues if it's not mitigated by a dramatic political geopolitical U-turn, which I don't see how that happens. And even as governments fall, the problem is that the system, this neoliberal system, has so embedded itself into the various governmental into the various governments throughout the EU, that what you've got is, do you want Boris Johnson or Keir Starmer? You know what I mean? Do you want the Democrats or the Republicans? Any way you look at it, you're getting, countries. I mean, you're getting people who are going to execute the same foreign policy, just a little different variation of the same foreign policy. And all of those people, none of those people really care at all about the working class, about the people, about the workers. No, none of them care. None of them care about the average working class. They're happy to sacrifice our lives. So there'll be a fall, clearly. That's how close we are. We're close to months to Europe's dramatic fall. And I think, though, that there will also be, in some of these countries, you'll start to see some people who want to go in, who want to reform, who definitely want to reform. I don't know about revolt, but you'll get some people who want to reform. And you'll start hearing the pressure will become unbearable because there's going to be so much social unrest, and then you'll have deaths from that. I mean, you could have literally countries start to really fall. I mean, like where a country does fall, where it's not managed by any government anymore. So we'll see. All right. Well, thanks a lot, everybody. That's all I wanted to talk about. And that is that, I see an ideological plague in Europe wherein the people who are running Europe are going to cause a lot of excess deaths, are going to cause a lot of suffering, misery, and horror. And they're doing it because of their ideology. They're doing it because their twisted ideology that says we got to hold on to power. We've got to support the United States empire, and they have to be the multipolar power in the world, even though that's gone and they're not the multipolar power in the world anymore. You have to pretend that they are and then try to hold on to what you're pretending still exists. I mean, that's what's sad. It's like the book you might have heard of Baudrillard, Simulacra and Simulacrum. That's it. You're trying this. There's something that doesn't exist, and that is the U.S. having being the most powerful country in the world and having all the power, having being the unipolar, as they call it, the unipolar moment, where there's one country in the world that controls everything, right? The US thinks that still exists and that they can hold on to it. But if it doesn't exist, then by the very nature of logic, if it doesn't exist, you can't hold on to it. It no longer exists. One can argue that there was a period in the 90s, there was a period in the 2000s where the US was the unipolar power. Those days are gone. Those days are over. And so the US is struggling to hold on to that. And that's what's going on in Europe. So Europe is caught in an ideological fight, in an ideological battle. This is not a military battle. This is where the US is saying ideologically, for a number of reasons, we should be in power and run the world, and everybody should do things our way. And therefore, we can do whatever we got to do to maintain that. And then they look at Russia's rising dramatically in power. And at a time when the US is trying to encircle Russia, and eventually take Russia out, encircle China and take China out. That's the plan. And Russia and China are smart enough to know that they're trying to do it. And they become powerful enough that it won't work anyway. And so now the US is just sacrificing Europe, saying, well, let's try. We'll throw some more Ukrainian bodies at the problem. We'll throw some more European economic bodies at the problem and see how things work out. And they ain't going to work out. And boy, they really ain't going to work out for Europe. But it's going to be the equivalent of a plague, I would think. Well, thanks a lot, everybody. Let me look and see. I don't think I got a single super chat today. Wow, interesting. Maybe it's because it's Sunday. I don't know. No super chats. And wow, this is going to be a first. Nope. Oh, well, thanks a lot, everybody. Let me tell you this. Okay, there we go. A couple of things, I'll be on all week, so make sure you, share everything. You smash the like button, please. Everybody, make sure if you're a member of my YouTube channel, I just got. Let me show you this. YouTube just removed a show very similar to this the other day. I got an email. Let me show you the email that I got from YouTube. The look at this. Look at this. Hi, we wanted to let you know our team. We wanted to let you know our team reviewed your content, and we think it violates our community guidelines. So we're not we know you may not have realized this was a violation of our policies. So we're not applying a strike to your channel. However, we've removed the following content. And here's the video. It's called "The U.S. Empire Cast Europe into the Abyss. Will Europe Move for Independence?" That violates their policies. Okay. We realize this may be disappointing news, but it's our job to make sure that YouTube is a safe place for all. If you think we've made a mistake, you can appeal this decision. You'll find more details. What our policy says: content that violates YouTube's terms of service or that encourages others to do so is not allowed on YouTube. This includes posting content previously removed for violating our terms of service or posting content from creators who are currently restricted who have been terminated under our terms. Keep in mind something. I didn't have anybody on there. I had no guest whatsoever. I didn't, in terms of, I didn't, look at the name of it. I didn't encourage anybody to violate their terms of service. So the bottom line is this. Why? I don't know. But I think this, because I said the U.S. empire cast Europe into the abyss, will Europe move for independence? When you understand that there's a bunch of people on YouTube who like used to work for NATO. There's literally people who work for NATO working for Google. There's literally people from the Atlantic Council working for Google. So you've got a bunch of neocon warhawks working for Google. And when they saw that, oh crap, this guy is saying, they're telling the truth, and that is that Europeans are getting screwed, and asking, are Europeans ever going to wake up enough to stop themselves from being screwed? And that's all it was. So it had to go. Oh, are you kidding me? That's got to go. Oh my gosh. Christopher, Debbie says, do you think that Sri Lanka was a stress test? No, I think it was, they really would like to. If you look at what happened in Kazakhstan a couple months before the war, bottom line is, if you look at last year, the year before last in Belarus, when they tried to take out Lukashenko, if you look at what's going on, the U.S. empire, if you look at the Bay of Piglets in Venezuela, the U.S. empire just ain't what it used to be at overthrowing countries anymore. It's a joke. It's pathetic. And so they're trying to overthrow countries, but they don't have the knowledge or ability or the authority, the power to do it anymore. So they make these attempts. And what they'll do is, they don't have any idea what to do. It's pathetic. They'll have some kind of a protest, and people will be wandering around protesting, and they'll like maybe hand out guns so people can get shot, but they don't really know what to do after that. They don't really know what to do. And so you end up with like Juan Guaido standing in front of an Air Force base declaring that the government of Venezuela is not legitimate or something, and then just leaving because everybody just went home. It wasn't like he was going to stand in front of the Air Force base and all the people were going to run out of the Air Force base and declare their allegiance to him. Wasn't happening. So that's where we are now. Just wanted to let you know, because I was talking about the same thing I'm talking here, the plight of Europe. I think they don't want people to talk about the plight of Europe because they don't know what to do. They don't know how to deal with it. They know they can't do anything that goes against their ideology, right? They can't do anything that goes against their ideological belief system, which says they have to, that if only they hold on to these sanctions a little more, Russia will fall. That's what the cult belief system is. If we just do a little bit more sanctions for a little bit longer, Russia will fall. So they can't do anything because that's ideological. So what does that leave them? When things start to fall out for the people, they can't help them. They can't. It would go against their ideology. That's not happening. So you're going to see the fall and rise of Europe. You're going to see Europe really, I think, fall apart. You're going to see people in Europe doing major protests. There's going to be violent protests. There's going to be violent pushback from the government, and it's going to be a nasty winter. And just not, adding the fact of the reality of people not having the energy they need to survive, it's going to be a mess. And then how does it go into the spring? I wouldn't want to be in Europe, buddy. I would not want to be in Europe. And I am not, I was supposed to go there last summer. I had my back injury was bothering me, so I couldn't go to Brussels and Munich. But I'll put it like this: there's always a lot of things to go cover in Europe, but I'm not going to cover anything this anytime soon. Anytime soon, because let's face it, if you fly in, what are you going to stay at a hotel where there ain't no guarantee you'll be able to fly back out? There's no guarantee you'll have food, that the hordes of hungry people wandering the streets won't eat you. No thanks. That's not Europe's going to be a very dangerous place to be, and so I ain't going to be there no time soon. Thanks a lot, everybody. At Garland Nixon on Twitter, Garland.Nixon on Instagram, Garland Nixon on Facebook, garlandin@gmail.com. Additionally, everybody, look in the show notes. Please become a member of my Rockfin channel, ROKFIN.com, rockfin.com/Garland Nixon. Please, you can become a member, and this really helps me out for those who can do it, $9.99 a month on a Rockfin, and you become a subscriber. I really appreciate anybody that can do that on Rockfin, become a subscriber. Then you can see all the premium stuff, my premium stuff, and anybody's premium stuff. But I really appreciate anybody who can become a subscriber on Rockfin at rockfin.com, ROKFIN.com/Garland Nixon, in case they toss me here. Also, I've got PayPal, I've got Buy Me a Coffee. You can see that. Oh darn, I didn't put the thing that scrolls, my thing that scrolls across. I didn't put that up. There we go. How about that? Patreon.com. I appreciate anybody who can become a Patreon, and PayPal. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great night.